Welcome, folks, to another episode, Insights with NetSupport. And you probably can already notice from the screen, but I am really pleased to have guests for today's session, Nicole Ponsford, or Nick, as everybody will know. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Al, or should I say AI, as we've just been talking about?
I think we can have some very trendy names going forward, but we'll keep them as brief as possible. So Al and Nick, I think, works pretty well in terms of conservation of letters. Absolutely. Listen, Nick, lots of people will already know you as the founder of the Global Equality Collective. And I know you've got loads of awards, including Top 50 Inspiring Women in Tech Europe. Personally, I give you the award of just being an all-round nice person and a great person to collaborate with. So it's lovely to have you here on Insights with NetSupport. But today we're going to talk about something that I know you are hugely passionate about, and not just the topic and the challenges, but actually the solutions or ways to help mitigate. And that's probably the best way to round it off. So let's kick off with something which is perhaps less of a positive topic, but one that we really need to be mindful of. Tell us from your perspective where you see the key challenges right now when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the modern world.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is I actually see them as huge opportunities. Some people see them as challenges. I see that we've got loads of things that we can do, which is, for me, is really exciting. So I think one of the key issues that we've got in our lived experience is, as humans, we are probably terrible at empathizing with others, when actually, when you look at the animal kingdom, we are the ones that really should be able to do it. So I think one of the challenges we've really got at the moment are people understanding the privileges that they have and the opportunities that maybe that they are, instead of including, that they're excluding others. And I think that's the biggest problem that we've probably got, if you take it either with technology companies or you take it with the education sector as well. So there is a growing awareness, but there's still quite a lot of work to be done.
Just on that point, I mean, you've shared lots that I'm certainly familiar with. We've done work together with the Fed around diversity and inclusion, and I know you've shared lots of insights with the team there. Do you think the changing landscape, when we think of a more digital world, particularly when I have a role supporting as the chair of a SEND board in our region and supporting education in lots of different ways. Do you think the changing landscape with a digital world, where we're moving away from some of the place-based restrictions and potentially then the economic restrictions, has an opportunity to level the playing field more when it comes to diversity and inclusion? I know it can work both ways.
Yeah, so I see technology as the greatest equalizer that we've got in modern society. That would be my short statement on it. So for me, I have multiple lived experiences which have actually created barriers. And they've done that as a teacher, as a school leader, and even now as a founder of an edtech company and a startup. But what has happened, I mean, I've worked remotely for over 10 years, so pre-COVID, because of the needs of having children who've got needs. So I wasn't able to go to all the meetings and all the conferences. So therefore, I was excluded from them. The reason I've fallen into this is because as a senior leader in a school, when I fell pregnant the first time, I was told I couldn't be a senior leader if I couldn't be on site 5 days a week. Now, those things are moving. We are seeing an evolution when it comes to flexible working, in terms of either, 3-4 days, phased retirement, more awareness around menstrual and menopause. So we're starting to see things happen in all different sectors. And in education, we're a bit slower to do it because we're state funded. And so, we're not always in control of our own destiny, are we? But I'm also seeing it in things when it comes to LGBT+, where people can have an avatar. They can be themselves at home, they can wear what they want, they can be themselves, but what they project out might be seen as more mainstream. And so therefore they don't encounter the challenges that they get actually in real life as well. So we know in esports, there's a great inclusive community there. And then my work now, and then also as co-head of education at Microlink, we're now into the start of the third year of looking at assistive technology. Now, not only does that help those with needs, and traditionally we'd think about maybe disability, we would think about maybe being neurodivergent as well. But actually, there's loads of time hacks and things you can do. So, for example, for me, I generally work at home in front of my screen. I can schedule emails. I can, when I'm doing my doctorate work, I can use assistive technology to read it better. And now we're starting to see how AI can help that as well. And what I think AI does at the moment, if we look at just with the written text, the way that it's creating equality is because it can digest large amounts of data, large amounts of reading information in a way that it makes it accessible to people who might find it more difficult to read either that kind of language or even the kind of volume of work that we kind of do. The other thing we're starting to see is with how AI can help with translation. So I know there's something called Pixel Chat, for example, that can actually translate as one person speaks to another in different languages, and it can translate it in real time. So we're starting to see that actually the technology is creating inclusion. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what your lived experience is in the real life, but it actually is breaking down those barriers when it comes to kind of our digitalized world as well. So yeah, I absolutely believe that technology is going to continue to create more of a level playing field. The issue we've got is obviously the infrastructure of that technology. And so until that's managed, where we've got the broadband and the access to devices and then that training, it doesn't really matter what the skills and mindsets are. So I think there's that people side, which comes with that infrastructure, isn't it? That has to be weighed up alongside the socialization of people, which become more important as we rely on technologies too.
Absolutely. I think, and a shout out to people like the team, like the Digital Poverty Alliance, where I think we've all seen digital can be that enabler, but it can also create that gap in terms of accessibility. And that's the key to then unlocking. I mean, it's interesting. It must be nearly 10 years ago, I was working with our schools and we were doing the Connected Classroom project with our students, talking with students in Africa. And the technology evolved to the point where actually the difference in language skills, the digital could bridge the gap in that communication, that auto translation that you talk about. And I also think when we think about SEND, but particularly I think about often in the workplace, our neurodiverse workers, some of the traditional ways of we have a meeting, face to face in the room, that eye contact, that way of engagement, actually digital can be an enabler to allow easier access to conversations and discussions, but in a way that isn't stressful or disadvantaging that individual.
Absolutely, and much more inclusive. And what we're going to start to see is the challenges of the day-to-day as we move into this. And so I really see the last 10 years, we're part of that digital revolution. It started with things that we now really take for granted, even things like, our smart speakers, our sat nav, things like that, but using the internet. I started teaching when Google first introduced its browser. I mean, it makes me feel like absolutely decrepit now, but we're only talking 20 years ago. And we're starting to see the speed that the beta testing of AI is already having. It's really exciting. And I think it's really interesting thinking about our students as well, as you mentioned, with that kind of global citizenship that we've got, so later I'm going to be essentially in Berlin. I go to Africa and I visit schools there, all from my house down in Bournemouth in Dorset. And actually what we're doing is starting to open that up to students and also illustrate the lack of stereotyping around that, because when a lot of people in this country might think of Africa, they might think of their own heritage, or they think of their own kind of associations with Africa from the 1980s with things like Live Aid. And actually what we can do now is offer really authentic experiences of connecting people around the world in a way that literacy isn't an issue. So when you're talking about those kind of disability and the barriers that we get with a whole education system that is based on how literate you are, and communication, actually the EdTech tools can help create opportunities, as I say, rather than the barriers and exclusion that we've had. They can help people access and communicate and be literate in ways that they might find that they've got more obstacles in than maybe neurotypical people, or those people that are verbal, or those people that can think nice and quickly like the teachers can. So that will then cause a shift again, won't it, in education and what actually is the purpose of education. And I think you and I get caught into quite a lot of conversations now about actually what is the purpose of education post-COVID with technology, and us understanding how social we need to be. You know, what makes a good teacher today might not be what makes a good teacher in 10 years, 20, 50 years.
Well, I love the fact that you focus on the opportunities. I mean, you and I both have a passion around education and giving young people the opportunity to be amazing. The conversation has moved, I think, to more focused around what do employers and what do you need to equip you for adult life, and skills becomes more prevalent over content knowledge, although there's a place and obviously role for both that sits in that. And I do think for some of our learners, when we think about how technologies accelerate so quick, Nick, that barrier of how much can you write down for a formative, you know, or a summative assessment, I think it's changed, hasn't it? Now that we look and we think, look, for years we've had tools, but now our learners that really struggle in certain situations, we can still capture evidence of their understanding and knowledge in different ways, and that unlocks for me a lot more equity in how we actually judge someone's. Well, I don't like to use the word success at school, because success for me is a well-rounded, confident individual with a love of learning that feels equipped to move on in life.
Attainment. Yeah, it helps with their attainment. And I think as we start to realise and learn, we realise what barriers we've put into education. So the idea that hundreds, thousands of children enter a room and have the same sensory experience of doing an exam, that they've got the same memory skills, that they've been able to learn in the same way, that they've had a consistency of teaching, etc., 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 let alone what goes around their lives. And you know, for me, my childhood was very chaotic and school was my safe place. I was fortunate that my schools were allowed me to do that. But we as old adults, we're starting to realise actually what was okay in the 70s and 80s and 90s isn't okay now. And more importantly, our students know that. So we've got the next generation's demanding flexible working. They want portfolios of jobs. They know it's not a career for life anymore. So therefore, the foundations of this formalised education we've had for 100 years is changing. It's not based on the old grammar school system, which is what our state school is. And actually, I think our challenge is how we serve, because actually the NHS serves, and so does the education system. We should be serving our children. And we know we're not. There's news headlines about EHCPs again this week. We know that the alternative provision, Sure Start, all those kinds of things where there was a service that hasn't been there, and we're seeing the impact of it. And I know from speaking to lots of online tutoring organisations, their numbers went up last week as students said, I'm not going into silent classrooms. I'm not going in there because I've got the wrong uniform. Actually, I don't feel safe in school. And parents are saying, I support my child. They're not going into those. So now we've got online schools, particularly things like Gaia Learning, where they are catering towards more neurodivergent students. And they are creating safe learning environments for young people. And we know that businesses are doing this. There's a massive push around neurodiversity in businesses across the whole D&I landscape. So we're kind of, I think the school sector is kind of in the middle now of having to play catch up, because employers are more aware of this, even from a risk mitigation point of view. Actually, parents and families are more aware, and we're kind of stuck in the middle. And that's why I think it is really important that there is that kind of understanding more than it. I mean, you and I, we've been around the block a few times when it comes to bringing in new technologies into education, but it's not just an understanding and awareness is there. There needs to be a real embrace and a real support, a hand-holding for our teaching workforce and our school systems around this, because, we've been very late adapters, particularly in England, when it comes to technology. And actually, it's in our faces now, and, quite literally. And so it's time that we feel confident.
It's good that the conversation is around, we've moved from this prescriptive, this standardized education system to the same conversation in a way with technology, which is, it's not going to be one size fits all. You're going to have a cohort of learners that will resonate and will embrace in different ways. And if you want that learning experience, it's that combination of how you serve up the learning experience, how you allow a child to actually engage and respond, and how you find different ways to capture evidence that they're progressing. And that whole concept, I think, is gradually coming to the fore, that just like any other resource, you'll need different ways of teaching and different tools to support different learners. I mean, it's great the conversation's there, but clearly we're not there yet. And we keep seeing, like you say, every time we think there's a move forward, there's a different pressure on capacity and resource to actually put the funds in place or the measures to support our most vulnerable learners. I know we've moved slightly from the broader topic in terms of diversity and inclusion in the broadest sense, but it was only likely that we were going to end up talking about within the education context and schools, and I think that's kind of fair enough. So let's find the middle ground. Young people, where do you see the biggest impacts of a lack of diversity and inclusion for young people right now?
I think it's access in education, albeit the content. With GC, we're doing a lot of work still around curriculum. Since the murder of George Floyd, there's been more of a demand that schools are anti-racist in their curriculum and their design. So it's fantastic to now see textbooks and initiatives to help really project the catchments of schools. So that's fantastic to start to see that. I think we're still missing in terms of understanding behaviour and communication against a need to be highly literate in education. And I think that at the moment, that will be the next thing that we kind of push on. We're seeing a kind of pushback in terms of discipline and behaviour, cracking down on behaviour at a time post-COVID where there was a lack of socialisation. There's a cost of living crisis, which is huge stress on even just middle-class families, let alone those from a low socioeconomic status. And actually there's a kind of unwillingness to understand that kind of hierarchy of needs that children need to have met before they can access learning. So I feel, again, another one of the challenges we've got is where children are under huge amounts of stress and anxiety, issues around well-being, chaotic backgrounds at home, and then coming into school, and instead of being met with empathy and compassion around having a sense of belonging, they're actually getting quite a stark reality, which they are then, I was a pretty bad teenager, I would be rebelling and not going into school if I was in school. Not all of them, as you're saying there, thank you. Not all of them, but there is that kind of, I suppose, binary experience with young people in schools at the moment. And I think moving away from some of the more physical identifiers that we've got, and normally the ones that the DFE capture too, but actually looking under that waterline of visibility and people's backgrounds, that socioeconomic status, those unseen things, I think that's our biggest problem, because a lot of the people making decisions in education don't come from those backgrounds, aren't surrounded by people like that, and so therefore they don't know what they don't know. And I think that's where the fight is, I think, at the moment, and that's what's difficult for those young people.
That really resonates. I mean, I know in most of our schools, SEMH has been in the broadest umbrella, thinking about our students' welfare and getting them back in a place to re-engage with learning in a positive way, and recognizing lots of the different experiences learners have had over the last few years. That takes away focus from perhaps what the national priority is. Right now the priorities was all about, I don't like the catch-up word, I think it's a really negative term. It implies children were, setting the wrong message, if you like. But that focus around that attainment, and then we're into the, schools need to do more right now when it comes to attendance, without necessarily recognizing the root causes and how we can actually embrace that. I do think a lot of schools have recognized that ultimately, if children aren't in the right space and it links with behavior, then learning is never going to flourish. And I think it comes down to those things that you shared. I mean, one definitely is capacity. Some schools are trying to apply a one-size-fits-all rule because they're really stretched on capacity. One is about context of the different strategies and ways that we could support different learners. And that's where there are gaps in CPD, without a doubt, for some professionals, and that's the same wherever you look in the world, isn't it? Really, there's always areas to better understand, and so I think it's the combination of those that's really creating pressures. I don't know why we were chatting, and the one thing that stuck in my head was you were talking about Sure Start centres, and it's one that really sticks with me because I spent 10 years on the scrutiny board for my local council, and it was the one time where I really got quite irate when I was told I was an idiot, given the financial pressures, for objecting to us closing Sure Start centres. And for me, it was like, that's the root accessibility and support for so many of our families with young children, and you just create the problem further upstream without recognizing it. And then lo and behold, we're kind of trying to reverse that under different names and umbrellas in a way that somehow isn't a reversal. But many of those things start with actually, don't wait till you're too far down the line. The sooner and the earlier you can get intervention, the better. And that's something we'll talk about in a minute, hopefully, when we can talk about some of the tools and resources that you provide to actually help in that journey. I'm going to have to ask you for top tips. It kind of feels like a quick pick from Nick. I think we should trademark that.
Oh, that feels like a segment, doesn't it?
Quick pick from Nick. Tell us about your top tips for building diversity and inclusivity in the classroom.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is listen to the voices. Listen to the people, particularly of those that aren't like you. So they're not basically agreeing and saying yes to you and your ideas. So that could be diversifying your social media feeds. GC, we obviously do that. So I'd like to tell you more about that. We also, I would suggest that you actually look to speak to others more in terms of your teams, in terms of who inspires you. So that could be in schools, thinking about your workshops, the guests that you invite, the books that you're reading, and just hear from other people and learn how other people experience their life. So that'd be the first thing. So listening to others. The other thing I would say is really reflecting on yourself and understanding the point that you're at in your life. So as we go through life and we have our own different life experiences, and it might be because of our friends, the way that our family is shaping up, it might be what we know indirectly. It's just kind of understanding where you're at and maybe what those gaps in your privilege are, or what privileges you've had as well. So the first one's voices, the second one would be privilege. And the third one I would think is like, how can you champion others? So we hear a lot about allyship and we hear about see it to be it. I think actually it's more about creating pioneers and being the first as well. So who can you open a door to? Who can you help? You're amazing at doing that, at bringing up kind of new voices and new ideas and innovation. But anyone can do that. You could think about, your friendship groups. You can think about if you're in school, who you can bring in, either in voluntary roles. I know the Institute of School Business Leaders is doing fantastic things around bursaries to help around race and ethnicity dynamics, as are the Church of England at the moment. So who could you champion? Who could you do more for as well? So those would be my three.
Well, obviously, I support all of those. The last one, I think all of us, irrespective of our role and whether we're focusing on diversity, inclusivity, or frankly, just being a good member of society and community, it never hurts to give other people a leg up, a push up. It doesn't cost anything other than time. But I think recognizing that for many of us, we don't have the lived experience to understand and tick all the boxes as we work through that. It's really important to have that constant reminder. Have you considered? Have you listened? Have you heard? One thing that I also kind of think is important, and I think most schools and MATs across the country, certainly not all, are on a journey, is actually recognizing that the most inclusive place for a young person to arrive is a place where they can see people that they can aspire to be and their progression, whether that's in the staff or, as you've indicated, the speakers, the former students that are held up on the wall as the high achievers, the success stories, the content that they read, being mindful that actually that's the most engaging thing, because we all like to feel part of something, part of a place, don't we?
Well, it helps us identify. I mean, when I started doing this work and I started to do talks, I reflected on who my role models were when I was younger. And it was people like Naina Cherry, Winona Ryder, Wonder Woman. And then I started to realise they're all dark, because actually in popular culture, it was all, everyone was blonde. And so I quite liked it when you saw people that had dark hair, had kind of a darker skin. And it made me really think, well, that's what I did. And then when I had children, I see my children doing the same. They look for role models like themselves. Now, if you don't see them and you see projected the role models of others, and that can even be us as grown-ups, like when we're looking at the CEOs that are out there, we're looking at the entrepreneurs who are out there, and we start to recognise, oh, they look like that. I don't look like that. That's not going to be me. That's not my background. That's not my lived experience. But that's what we need to kind of start doing. I'd also do a bit of a caveat to be kind to yourself about it. Don't go, you don't have to fire hose like role models all over yourself to kind of get it right. Just, have a reflection on kind of, oh, well, maybe that's what I'm missing, or I don't know, I know that, or I don't know that. So I'm going to go to an organisation, find out a bit more, and just be kind of curious and try to get a little bit more comfortable and confident with it. So I think sometimes people almost put themselves in a corner. They try to do it all and it's overwhelming. So they go, I just can't do it. So again, be kind to yourself about it as well. Like if you've got a willingness to learn, still pat yourself on the back and give yourself an extra slice of cake or something, because, it's all good.
Listen, cake is always a good lever for anything. But I do like the term be curious. I think that for many is a much softer way of saying, look, you just need to be mindful. You just need to make the effort when you can to learn more, understand more, and listen. We've talked lots about challenges as well as opportunities and reflecting on some of those key things we can think about. Obviously, you've put all of that experience and ideas and brought together amazing voices from across the sector and wrap that up into Global Equality Collective. Now, that's a great term, but there's lots of different bits within that are actually accessible to schools, ready to go to really help signposting and I guess stimulate that thinking. So rather than me try and explain, for those listening, please, particularly because you've had a great new launch in the last week for schools.
Thank you.
Tell everybody about Global Equality Collective and particularly what you've been launching in the last week.
Thank you. It's been like a bit of a tsunami of what's happened. So I still have to sort of, I think I can't really accept what's going on because it's so big. But I suppose the Global Equality Collective with two things. So the first thing, it came out of me, again, being a teacher. And I needed a network. I was a young teacher. I became a head of department in my NQT +1. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. I was winging it all the way. And so, I became an examiner, so I understood curriculum. I joined networks. And then when there wasn't a network, I would make one up myself. So, when I became advanced skills teacher, I created one. When it came to really thinking about diversity and inclusion, because of my frustration, I think that the education system inclusion had to be fought for, I started to look around what solutions were in place. And I was part of a conversation where it was really clear that everyone was waiting for someone else to do this. And also there was a real discrepancy with consistency when it came to work and inclusion. And consultants were charging schools loads of money. And I've got a big problem with that. So I kind of thought, well, what if we could create our own system, if we could create our own solutions, what would it look like? And I kind of went on this passion project sidebar, which has led to the GC. So I wanted to understand inclusion better. And I looked at the Equality Act and I felt it didn't go far enough. And so I went out and I, in a very non-creepily way, hunted down all the cool people that really inspired me and asked if they talked to me and asked if they might like to consider what we could do as an alternative. And so that's what the Global Equality Collective is, a collective of diversity and inclusion experts in education. And I'm very proud to say we've got the biggest collection. We've got over 300 individuals and organisations, from people like Diverse Ed and BAME Ed and LGBT plus Ed to authors like Matt Pinkett, who's just written Boys Do Cry, which is an incredible piece of work around mental health and our young men. We've got academics like Professor Gina Rippon, Professor Sonia Blanford, who's a social mobility professor. We've got just the most amazing people. And what that allows us to do is not just look at one lived voice. We can look at a community or a characteristic and look across the board and look at the extremities of what's happening and then help schools with an accessible way based on where they're at. So if you follow us on social media, We amplify loads of people. So if you want to join a collective, join us. We amplify your work, we'll network you, we'll get your voice out there, we'll share your stuff with our schools. But it also means schools have got a central place to go. So that's a collective, which now you're part of, which is fantastic. And then what we've done as a collective is we've basically co-designed with schools and colleges and educational gurus and amazing people, the GC platform. So the GC platform is the world's first hyper-diverse platform currently for schools and colleges and educational organisations. And what it does, it captures that voice. So we wanted a safe and anonymous way, rather like Google, that we could capture voices and help schools get it right. And that's what we do. So the platform with the collective, we've raised, I think it's about £380,000 to build it, because this tech doesn't come cheap. We launched it about 18 months ago. We spent the first year looking at staff, because we have to get the ecosystem right for schools to be safe with staff first. So we did that. My aim was to get 100 schools. I think we're just shy of about 300 schools now across 25 countries. And then the last year we worked on our student side. So that's what we've just launched. So we've worked very hard, and early years is important. So we capture student voices from the age of 3 in early years. We work with Goldsmiths University, as well as 50 schools and colleges on this. They even work with our software team, which was incredible. Loads of students talking about UX and kind of things. And so we've just launched that, and that is a way of really safely understanding how your students feel, but actually not just doing the usual headlines like you get in D&I, like 4 out of 5 think this. We can go intersection, we can look at those minute groups of your students with their lived experience, so you can really target your support. And then our collective come in with lots of materials and ideas of how you do that. So the GEC is a collection of experts, and then the platform, which is accessible. It's incredible value for money. We have co-funded it. It's a 50% discount for state schools, and frozen all our prices, because we want to be in every school. We want to help every school. And so far it's working. So that's our work.
Fantastic. And brilliant work it is. And I think what really resonates is, if you are serious as a school about thinking about how you can unlock the potential and support all of your learners, your collective experience that sits there at the team is probably beyond any other group that there is available anywhere, frankly. And I think that's hugely rewarding, but also shapes that real sense of trust that that the intent and how you're actually shaping that and evidencing from within as well as externally, and that often is something. Sometimes I think maybe I use this in a very generalized term. Other edtech startups maybe would have looked for the speed to market as being the driver, rather than the let's get it right and do it layer by layer and make sure that it's exactly there. And my favorite word whenever I'm talking about technology creation is about co-production. Don't wait till you've produced something and tell people why they need it. Actually ask why they need it and shape it with them.
Absolutely.
It's not rocket science, but often gets missed in the haste to be the first one across the finish line. So for me, it ticks all of those boxes, which is always fantastic. But those listening are going to say, well, this all sounds great, but where do I get hold of it? Where do I need to go to find out more? Whether it's to listen and learn from the resources from the collective, or whether it's to actually get the platform and start having a play with it within the school context.
Absolutely. So our website is thegc.education. So you can jump in there. You can even jump straight into the platform if you want to. We've designed it that if you want to get started with it straight, you can. We've got a great support page, which people don't really tend to need because the platform guides you through it all anyway. We've also got our socials, which are at GC Collects. They're on our webpage as well. Come and join our community. We've got over 13,000 across social media. Our new Instagram page looks very pretty and bright. We like to be
super trendy.
It's a media teacher in me, you see. So yeah, come and join the discussion. And then we've got lots and lots of events on. I'm at Pedagogy Hampshire actually this Saturday. We're at the Tes Sen show. We're at a Form Strategy conference. We're at BET in January. So come along, come and say hi. I never recognise anyone from Twitter, so please come and tell me who you are. We can grab a cuppa, and we're basically all the work we do is to help those in the classrooms make their classrooms extraordinarily inclusive. So come and say hi.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing, Nick. It's always lovely to catch up with you. And I always give a thumbs up to great products that I think are beneficial to schools. But I think in the case of this, it's a double thumbs up from me, because I know it's great and I know the people who are involved. And it just, from a school's perspective, just get onto the website and have a look. There's no reason why not to, is there?
Thank you, Al, and thanks everyone for their time.
My pleasure. See you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.